Hi everyone! Today we're back with block 6 of the 2020 quilt. So we're going to be adding two new elements into our blocks this week. One of them is going to be your basic 4-patch, and then the other one is going to be the flying goose block, a very common block in quilt piecing. So we're going to be starting with a little demonstration on doing the flying goose. So we're including with your downloads this week an instruction sheet with a chart that has all of your different requirements for making all the different size flying geese, and then a step-by-step how to go through and how to make the flying geese. I'll be showing you on the sewing machine with a little demonstration also. So this time we're going to be working with the stitch and flip method for making a flying goose. So you're going to start with a rectangle and 2 squares. On the back of your squares, you need to draw a line, corner to corner, diagonally, one line. Then you're going to be taking those squares, placing them on top of your rectangle, and this time we're going to be sewing directly on the line, not the 1/4 inch on either side, directly on the line. We're going to need to iron that one open, and then we're going to need to add the second one, and again sewing corner to corner on the line. So we're going to go over to the sewing machine and I'm going to do a little demonstration on that. Okay, so here we are at the sewing machine. So first we're going to take our rectangle and we're going to take our first square. We have our line already drawn on the squares, and I'm going to place that square so that the line goes from my bottom corner up to the center of my rectangle. We do not want to have it, you got to be careful that you don't do it this way, otherwise when you iron it open you're going to be creating that angled rectangle like we did on previous quilt blocks. So again, we need to go from the bottom corner up to our top center. So now I'm going to stitch, and it's very important that you start right at the tip of this small block and you stitch on the line, and you end right at the tip of the bottom. Okay, so there I have my line drawn. I started here and I ended here. I'm going to do one more. This time I'm going to purposely sew so that I don't end right where that corner meets, just so I can show you what happens. So as I'm sewing, I'm going to kind of angle off to the side a little bit, which a lot of times that happens. You know, you get to the end of that block and it kind of wings over to the left or to the right. So if you can see, my line is up here, but my stitching line is down there. So what that does is when I go to iron this open, okay, if I iron this, it's going to make it that it's not even with the top of my square. Okay, and I'm also have a little bit of an angle going on down here. Versus the first one, when I iron this one open, I'm literally folding that square directly in half, and this point is going to be nice and tight, and this point is going to be nice and tight. Okay, so if this happens, you can, if it's really bad, you know, if it's just a little bit, you can leave it in place. But if it's really bad, what I do, instead of ripping this all out now, I know my square, it's in the right spot, my line was just off, so I'm going to go about halfway up. I'm going to put my needle down, make sure that my line is centered, put my needle down, and now I'm going to sew, and this time I'm going to sew right on the line. And now I can just come back with my seam ripper and just rip out that little bit of extra stitching. that I don't want in there. So I can just rip out about an inch or so of extra seams. I can pull that out. And now my corner is going to be right where I want it to be. So now I need to go iron these so that I'm folding them in half and getting a nice sharp edge there. Okay, so I'm back. Now I need to add the other square onto my other corner. Again, I need to make sure that my line is going the other way. I need to make sure that my line is going from my center down to my bottom corner. And it is going to be overlapping about a 1/4 inch. We wanted to do that so that we have that 1/4 inch seam allowance at the top of our goose. Then I can leave that one in there again and do my chain piecing. I can clip them apart. And now when I go to press them, there's my flying goose. So this is my goose and wing 1 and wing 2. Okay, so I have my flying geese all ironed, but we also have 3 layers in here, and that just is usually a little too bulky for my seam allowances, so I'd like to get some of that out of there. Traditionally, we're going to pull this one back and cut away both of these layers, so it leaves me just one layer like a normal piece would be. Some people like to cut out only this middle layer and leave this original rectangle there. What I like to do is if I flip it around to the back, I can tell if my flying geese, the wing part, this white part, is extending beyond or out of shape from what my original rectangle size was. These look pretty good, so I feel like I'm able to trim off both layers and just work with the one layer here. And this I just usually do by hand with the scissors rather than a rotary cutter. So I'm just going to trim both of these back about a 1/4 inch away from my stitch line. Okay, so there are my 2 flying geese. I had already made 2 of them up, and now we need to sew these together into one unit. So again, I'm going to do that by taking one of them, placing it right side together on top of the other. And when I sew this 1/4 inch seam, I'm really, see if you can see it with my thin thread. I'm not sure if you can see it, but right where the intersection comes with those 2 lines, as I sew across here, I'm going to try to get my needle to hit right at that intersection where those 2 threads meet, and that'll make sure that I get a nice point right where the tip of my flying goose is. Okay, so I'm going to go sew that. All right, so here are my 2 flying geese units that I need for our block. So again, they will be this section and this section. Okay, I'm just going to make sure that they're squaring up to the 4.5 that I want my blocks to be. I tend to be a double checker. Not much to square off, but I'd rather do my trimming now than try to fight with a square later, and if I'm not sure where. I'd rather do my trimming now than fight with a square later as I'm trying to put it into my block and not sure exactly where to line things up. All right, so I can set those 2 off to the side. And now we need to work with our 4-patch blocks, okay? So they're pretty simple. We have 2 colors and we just need to sew them together in units and then sew those units together. So to make our 4-patch units, I've already made this one up and I've already pre-sewn the 2 sections for the next one. When I sewed them, I ironed them, and I ironed underneath my orange because that's my darker color. So as long as you iron your pieces to the same color. Then I'm going to take one of them, do a half turn. So now when I go to put these 2 together, I can do what's called nesting, okay? So where this little ridge is from where I ironed this one, and there's a little ridge by the orange where I ironed this one. And I'm just going to fit those 2 together. You kind of rub it a little bit and they kind of lock into place. And then I'm going to take my pin, and I like to pin in on one side and then come out on the other side. Okay, so I went in on this side and I went out on this side. That way it helps when I'm sewing that this bottom one doesn't flip in the opposite direction of what I want it to go. So I'm just going to sew these real quick. Okay, so here are my 2 4-patches. My intersections are nice and tight right in the middle. And I have 1 seam going to the left and 1 seam going to the right. So it'll lay nice and flat. Okay, so again, with my blocks, I need to put my flying geese. And I want to have my orange ones going diagonally. So I'm going to lay those 2 that way. And I want my flying geese to be 1 going up and 1 going down. So again, I'm going to sew this unit together. And then I'll sew this unit together. And then once those are sewn together, I just need to come back and sew that center seam. So my other colorways, again, this was our original red and white colorway. And then I had, this was my 12 fat quarter color pack. So for this one, I did the same color for my flying geese. So instead of cutting 2 of this color and 2 of this color, I just obviously cut 4 of the same color. And for this one was the same way, where I did 2 brown and then my diagonal. This was my scrappy block.